I gave them everything, but it was never enough. Until one day, I decided to walk away. What kind of idiots actually pay him? My dad mocked my career, so I cut him off. 6 months later, my sister reached out. I can still hear his laughter, the smug chuckle, the way he leaned back in his chair, shaking his head like I was some dumb kid chasing a pipe dream. What kind of idiots actually pay him? He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. My uncles, my cousins, even my mom, who just sat there, pressing her lips together like she always did when she didn't want to pick sides. I was standing in our family's dining room, home for yet another forced holiday gathering, just trying to explain my work, trying to get a sliver of recognition. Instead, I got that. Mockery, disbelief, public humiliation. And that was the moment I knew. I was done. It wasn't the first time. My dad never took me seriously. Not when I got my first client. Not when I landed my biggest contract. Not even when I showed him the numbers, the money, the success, the proof that I wasn't some failure clinging to a fantasy. To him, if I wasn't in a suit, sitting in a corner office with a boss breathing down my neck, it wasn't a real job. But I let it slide, over and over again. I ignored the jabs at family dinners, the passive-aggressive comments about my weird little job, the way he'd introduce me at parties. This is my son. He does something online. Like I was a joke. Like I wasn't the one paying off their mortgage behind the scenes. But this was the final straw. Because I wasn't a broke teenager anymore. I wasn't some lost kid trying to prove myself. I was the one keeping this family afloat. Every month I sent money. Quietly. Without being asked. Because even though my dad refused to respect me, I couldn't stand to see my mom struggle. New fridge? I covered it. Car repairs? Done. My sister's college tuition? They miraculously had enough. I never threw it in their faces. Never asked for thanks. But that night, as I stood there, listening to my dad laugh at me, something inside me snapped. Enough. No more transfers. I made the decision in silence. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just smiled, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking app. Click. One by one, I canceled everything. Mortgage payments. Monthly deposits. The emergency fund I'd been refilling for years. Gone. Then I looked up, locked eyes with my dad, and raised my glass. Cheers. He smirked, thinking he'd won. Thinking I was letting it go. He had no idea. That was 6 months ago. And 2 nights ago, my sister called. Shaking. Panicked. Begging me to help. When my sister's name lit up my phone, I didn't pick up right away. I just stared at the screen, watching it vibrate in my hand. It had been 6 months. 6 months of silence. 6 months without a single call, a single text, not even a half-hearted attempt at checking in. Now, suddenly, she needed to talk? I already knew why. Still, a small part of me hesitated. Because before everything, before the resentment, before the weight of being the family's invisible safety net, before all of it, she was my sister. The one person in that house who had never treated me like a wallet with legs. So I answered. Her voice came fast, breathless. I didn't want to call, but it's bad. Really bad. I didn't say anything. Just waited. Dad, he's not okay. I leaned back in my chair, fingers tightening around my phone. Not okay how? She hesitated, like she didn't want to say it. Then, finally, he lost his job. I exhaled slowly. So that was it. He hadn't just lost my money. He'd lost his own. For years, my dad had built his whole image on one thing: control. He was the provider, the man who made things happen, the guy everyone respected. At least, that's what he wanted the world to see. But the truth? He'd been barely holding it together for years. And without me quietly picking up the slack, without the financial cushion he'd grown so used to, it had finally caught up with him. Mom's trying to keep things together, but they're behind on everything. The mortgage, the bills, it's worse than I thought. I let that sink in. All my life, my father had acted like I was the irresponsible one. The dreamer. The one wasting time on a career that wasn't real. Yet here we were. Me, thriving. Him, watching everything collapse. The irony was almost laughable. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious, my sister continued. But they could lose the house. They need help. I closed my eyes, rubbing my temple. That word again. Help. It was always the same. Every time. Just a little help. Just for now. Just until things stabilize. But things never stabilized, because why would they? Not when they had me, their built-in solution. And now that I wasn't there to catch them, they were finally feeling what it was like to stand on their own. Come on, she pushed. I know you can afford it. You're doing fine. It's just a little help to get them back on their feet. I opened my eyes. There it was. The assumption. That no matter what, I'd step in. That I'd hear the word family and forget everything else. That I'd cave. But this time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt angry. Not at her. Not really. At him. At the man who had spent years tearing me down, calling my work a joke, telling me I'd never make it, while secretly depending on me to hold everything together. And now, when it all came crashing down, he still wasn't calling. Not to apologize. Not to admit he was wrong. No. He had sent my sister instead. Because asking for help himself? That would mean admitting that I had one. Did Dad ask you to call me? I finally said. Silence. Then, quietly, no. That caught me off guard. He doesn't know I'm calling. He'd kill me if he found out. I frowned. That didn't make sense. If he was really desperate, he'd be leaving angry voicemails. He'd be sending passive-aggressive texts about how I'd abandoned my family. But I hadn't heard a word from him. So what's really going on? I asked. Another pause. Then she finally admitted it. He's not just broke. He's different. He doesn't talk to anyone. He barely leaves the house. It's like he's given up. I sat up a little. That I hadn't expected. I had pictured him raging, blaming me, complaining to everyone who would listen. Not this. I don't know what to do, she admitted. He won't listen to Mom. He won't listen to anyone. I thought maybe. I cut her off. No. Her breath hitched. No, I repeated, firmer this time. I could feel it, the old guilt, the instinct to fix things, to protect, to step in before it got worse. But I swallowed it down, because the truth was, I had helped. For years. And it had never been enough. I wasn't about to go back. So that's it, she said, her voice shaking. You're just done. I exhaled. Yeah, I am. Silence. Then, finally, I shouldn't have called. She hung up. I sat there, phone still in my hand, staring at the wall. I had done the right thing. I knew that. But then why did my chest feel so damn heavy? I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was reconsidering. Not because I felt guilty. But because I kept hearing my sister's voice in my head. The way she whispered, before it's too late. Too late for what? They were behind on the mortgage. My dad had lost his job. That was bad, sure, but not end of the world bad. Not this is an emergency bad. Yet something about the way she said it felt off. Like she knew something I didn't. The next morning, I woke up to 5 missed calls. 3 from my mom. 2 from a number I didn't recognize. A voicemail. I pressed play. You did this to us. My father's voice. Low, hoarse, filled with quiet rage. I hope you're happy. I really do. That was it. No demands. No begging. No we're family, we help each other. Just those 5 words. You did this to us. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Just blame. As if I hadn't covered their bills for years. As if I hadn't sacrificed my own savings, my own peace of mind, to make sure they never had to struggle. And now that they actually had to face the consequences of their own choices, suddenly it was all my fault. I should have deleted the message. Instead, I played it again. And again. And the more I listened, the calmer I felt. Because this was proof. Proof that no matter what I did, no matter how much I gave, they would never appreciate it. Proof that I had made the right choice. So I blocked his number. And I moved on with my day. But my family? They weren't done with me yet. That afternoon, my sister called again. This time, she wasn't pleading. She was furious. "You blocked Dad." I leaned back in my chair, sighing. "Yeah. Are you serious?" she snapped. "He's losing everything and you're just cutting him off?" I didn't respond. Because what was there to say? I had already cut him off 6 months ago. He just hadn't felt it until now. "Mom is losing it," she continued. "She's trying to hold everything together, but she can't. They're drowning. And you," she stopped, like she couldn't even find the words. I waited. Then she exhaled sharply. "I don't even recognize you anymore." That one stung. Because deep down, some part of me still wanted to be the good sibling. The reliable one. The one people could count on. But then I remembered. Being the good one had cost me years of stress. Being the good one had meant working insane hours, skipping vacations, budgeting my own life so they could live comfortably. Being the good one had turned me into their personal ATM. So yeah, maybe she didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe that was a good thing. "I gotta go," I said, voice steady. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "I hope you can live with yourself." Then she hung up. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Let them be mad. Let them blame me. I wasn't coming back. And this time, I meant it. The silence didn't last long. I had barely gone a full day without a call, a text, a guilt trip before my phone lit up again. This time, it was my mom. I didn't answer. Then another text came in from my sister. "Mom's crying. Are you happy now?" I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Happy? Was that what they thought? That I was sitting here, celebrating their downfall? That I was taking pleasure in watching everything fall apart? Because the truth was, I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel much of anything. Maybe a little exhausted. A little numb. But happy? No. Because no matter how much they had used me, no matter how much my dad had mocked me, no matter how entitled they had been to my success, they were still my family. And some part of me, the part that had spent years making excuses for them, still cared. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the couch. I wasn't playing their game. Not anymore. 3 days passed. No more calls. No more texts. And for a moment I thought, maybe that was it. Maybe they had finally accepted it. Then, late one evening, I got a notification. A Facebook post. My mom had written something. I shouldn't have looked. I knew it would be bad. But I clicked anyway. And there it was. A long, dramatic post about how sad she was, how hard things had been, how some people turn their backs on family when they need them most. She never mentioned my name. But she didn't have to. Because the comments made it obvious. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years chimed in. "That's awful. Family is everything." Some people forget where they came from. Ungrateful kids these days. So selfish. I scrolled through, reading the judgment, the assumptions, the lies. Not one of them knew the truth. Not one of them knew that I had paid their mortgage for years. That I had kept them afloat while my dad played the role of the provider. They thought I had just walked away. For no reason. And my mother? She let them believe it. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not sadness. Not guilt. Anger. Because after everything I had done for them, after all the money, all the sacrifice, they had no problem turning me into the villain. Fine. Let them. I wasn't coming back. And the next time they needed me, I'd let the call go to voicemail. I should have ignored it. I should have closed the app, turned off my phone, and moved on with my life. But instead, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring, voice already thick with emotion. "Oh, so now you care?" I ignored the bait. "Why are you posting about me online?" She let out a shaky sigh. "I didn't use your name." That made me laugh, sharp, humorless. "You didn't have to." Silence. Then, softly, "I just don't understand how you could do this to us." Do this to them? I felt my jaw tighten. "I spent years helping you," I said, voice steady. "I paid your bills. I covered your mortgage. I took care of things Dad was too proud to admit he couldn't handle. And now that I finally stop, suddenly I'm the bad guy? She sniffled. It's not about the money. I almost dropped the phone. Not about the money. Not about the money? That was rich, coming from someone whose entire life had been built on the financial support I had provided. I took a slow breath, forcing down the anger bubbling in my chest. If it's not about the money, I said, then why did you only call me when it ran out? More silence. And that was my answer. She had nothing. No defense. No apology. Just empty guilt trips and social media posts designed to make me look like the villain. I clenched my jaw. Don't call me again, I said. Then, before she could reply, before she could sob out another manipulative line, I hung up. And this time, I meant it. For the first time in months, my phone was silent. No calls. No texts. No guilt trips. It should have felt good. It should have felt like victory. But instead, it felt strange. Like the calm before the storm. Like something was coming. And I was right. Because a week later, my sister called. Not with anger. Not with manipulation. With panic. Dad's in the hospital. I didn't respond right away. Because for a second, just a second, I wasn't sure how I felt. Shock? No. Sadness? Not really. Maybe just numb. It's bad, she continued. Mom doesn't know what to do. She keeps saying it's stress, that it's because of everything that's happened. I knew what she meant. She was blaming me. Even now. Even after everything. I took a slow breath. What happened? She hesitated. Then, finally, heart attack. So there it was. I closed my eyes, running a hand over my face. A part of me had seen this coming. My father had always been the kind of man who carried his stress like a badge of honor, who bottled up everything until it exploded. And now? It had finally caught up to him. Mom wants you to come. Of course she did. Because no matter what, no matter how much they pushed me away, no matter how many times they mocked me or used me, I was still the first person they called when things fell apart. I exhaled. I'll think about it. It was a lie. Because I already knew my answer. I wasn't going. Not this time. Not after everything they had done. I didn't go to the hospital. Not out of spite. Not because I wanted to prove a point. But because I knew exactly how it would go. I'd walk into that hospital room, and the second my mother saw me, she'd burst into tears, acting like I had finally come to my senses. My sister would stand there, arms crossed, watching, waiting for me to break. And my father? He wouldn't say a word. He wouldn't thank me for coming. He wouldn't acknowledge what he had done, how we got here. He'd just lie there, silently expecting me to fix everything. That was how it had always been. But I wasn't that person anymore. So I stayed home. 2 days passed before my sister called again. This time, her voice was low. Tired. You can still fix this. I exhaled. Fix what? Everything. She paused. Dad is different now. He's not the same. He's not. I cut her off. He's not invincible anymore? Silence. Then, finally, yeah. That was the truth, wasn't it? For years, my father had been untouchable. The man who always had control, who never needed help, who could talk down to anyone and never face the consequences. But now? Now he was just a man. Weak. Vulnerable. And suddenly, they all expected me to forget everything. To pretend the last 6 months hadn't happened. To step back into my old role. Mom says he wants to see you. I let out a short laugh. Did he say that? More silence. Because we both knew the answer. No, he didn't. Because my father would never ask for me. Not directly. Not in a way that meant admitting he had been wrong. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. You want me to come to the hospital? Then what? She hesitated. Then, we figure things out. Together. Like a family. Like a family. I closed my eyes. This was it. The moment. The moment they had been pushing for since the day I cut them off. The moment where I was supposed to give in. To say yes. To fix everything. I took a deep breath. And then, finally. No. A sharp inhale from the other end. No. No, I repeated. I'm done. I've been done. But he's dealing with the consequences of his own choices. Silence. Then, softly, I don't think I can forgive you for this. I exhaled, feeling something heavy lift from my chest. I think that's the first honest thing you've said to me in months. And then, before she could respond, I hung up. I thought that was the end of it. I had said my piece. I had made my choice. I wasn't coming back. But my family? They weren't ready to let me go. Because a week later, my mother showed up at my door. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of everything had finally settled on her shoulders. Her eyes were red. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse. For a second, just a second, I almost felt guilty. Then she spoke. We have nothing left. No hello. No I'm sorry. Just that. I exhaled slowly, gripping the doorframe. Mom. The bank is taking the house, she interrupted. Your father's still in the hospital. Medical bills are piling up. And your sister. She shook her head. She's barely holding it together. I clenched my jaw. Not my problem. Not anymore. Please, she whispered. Just help us one last time. I almost laughed. Because that's what they always said. One last time. But it was never the last time. It was just the start of another cycle. I took a slow breath. Then, carefully, what about Dad? She hesitated. He doesn't know I'm here. Of course he didn't. Because asking for my help himself? That would mean admitting he had failed. I crossed my arms. You expect me to help him when he spent years tearing me down? When he treated me like I was nothing? She swallowed hard. He's your father. And I was his son, I shot back. But that never stopped him from treating me like garbage. She flinched. I should have felt bad for saying it. But I didn't. Because it was the truth. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to say it out loud. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to beg, but I shook my head. I'm not fixing this. Tears welled in her eyes. Then what are we supposed to do? I met her gaze, voice steady. Figure it out. And then, before she could say another word, I shut the door. For the first time in my life, I shut the door on my mother. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I expected more calls, more texts, more dramatic Facebook posts about how cruel I was, how family should always stick together. But nothing came. Silence. And that was almost worse. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. I didn't reach out. Neither did they. Maybe they had finally accepted it. Maybe they had finally realized I wasn't going to fix their mistakes. Or maybe they were just waiting. Because 3 weeks after my mother showed up at my door, I got a text from my sister. No anger. No guilt-tripping. Just 2 words. You win. I stared at the message for a long time. I should have felt satisfied. But instead, I just felt tired. Because this was never about winning. I hadn't cut them off to prove a point. I hadn't walked away to punish them. I had done it to save myself. But they would never understand that. To them, this was a game. A battle of wills. A twisted test of who would break first. And now, since I hadn't caved, since I hadn't come running back with my wallet open, they were conceding. Not with an apology. Not with accountability. Just resignation. Like I was the villain. Like I had forced their hand. Like they hadn't done this to themselves. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't playing their game anymore. I never responded to my sister's text. You win. Because there was nothing to win. This wasn't a game. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about saving myself. For years, I had let them take from me my money, my energy, my time. And when I finally stopped, when I finally put myself first, they acted like I had betrayed them. But the truth? They had betrayed me a long time ago. A month passed. Then, out of nowhere, my mother called. This time, I answered. Not because I wanted to, but because I was curious. She sounded careful, cautious, like she wasn't sure how I'd react. Your father wants to talk to you. I said nothing. He's been thinking a lot. About how he treated you. About everything. And he just wants to explain. Explain. Right. Because now that everything was gone, his job, his house, his control, now he wanted to talk. Put him on. I heard a shuffle, then his voice, weak, quiet. I know I wasn't a good father. I stayed silent. I was hard on you. Tough. But it wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I wanted to make you strong. There it was. The justification. The same excuse toxic parents always use to rewrite history. We were just trying to teach you a lesson. But I had learned my lesson a long time ago. I exhaled, gripping my phone. I learned that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. I learned that you never respected me, not as a son, not as a person. And I learned that the only way to win with you was to walk away. Silence. Then, finally, his voice small, almost desperate. So that's it? I smiled. Yeah, Dad. That's it. And this time, when I hung up, it really was over. That was a year ago. At first, it felt strange. For the first time in my life, I wasn't constantly checking my phone, waiting for the next crisis, the next emergency, the next demand for money. I wasn't drowning in guilt, wondering if I was a bad son, a bad brother. I was free. And them? They lost the house. My father never got another job. He blamed everything on his health, on bad luck, on the economy, on everyone except himself. My mother moved in with a distant relative. My sister cut ties with both of them. And me? I built a life that was finally mine. No more guilt. No more obligations. No more being the family's personal ATM. And for the first time in my life, I never looked back.